This is part 4 of the true legend of Jesse James. William T. Anderson, also known as Bloody Bill Anderson, was one of the lieutenants for Clark Quantrill's raiders up until March of 1864, when they got into a disagreement and decided it was best for Bloody Bill to go his own way. And so he formed up his own band of guerrillas. By that time, Frank had left Quantrill's raiders, not due to any kind of squabbles or anything, but just because he had served his time. They were irregulars and guerrillas, so what you basically did was it was your word pretty much as to how much time you wanted to serve. If you felt like going 3 months, you did 3 months. If you felt like 6 months, you did 6 months. It's just whenever you were available. So his term was up, and so Jesse and him both decided at the same time they would start riding with Bill Anderson's guerrillas. And Bill Anderson was quite a character. If you would have seen him riding his horse and looked at the bridle of the horse, which are the leather straps around the horse's head, you'd have seen all kinds of little furry pieces dangling down of various colors. And those actually weren't fur trim on the horse's bridle. What those were scalps. And one of the reasons why he got his name Bloody Bill Anderson is after there was any kind of battle or shootout, he would take the dead bodies and he would do one of 3 things. He would scalp them, mutilate them, or decapitate them. So that's one of the reasons why he got his name Bloody Bill Anderson, just besides the fact the guy was a one-man revenge posse. I'd say probably that was his driving force behind everything he did, was revenge and vengeance. His dad was shot in a dispute over ownership of a horse by a judge, and 2 sisters in his family were arrested by the Union soldiers and put in a prison camp. So he was out for vengeance, and he would also write letters to the local newspapers, kind of telling them his side of the story and how his family was mistreated and why he was doing what he was doing. But we won't go into that now. What we will go into is the first exploit of Jesse James. And that would be the Battle of Centralia, or some people call it the Raid of Centralia. Technically, I think it still could be considered a battle of the Civil War, because it was during the Civil War when this happened. This was Centralia, Missouri. But if you look at the story as a whole, it seems a heck of a lot more of an outlaw robbery than it does any kind of a Civil War battle, but I guess it had aspects of both. So anyway, Bloody Bill Anderson, Frank James, Jesse James, and the rest of his guerrilla group, which numbered about 225, camped about 4 miles south of Centralia. And various stories give different numbers. Some people say he took 30 with him into town for the raid, and some people say he took 100 in. I'm thinking the way the story plays out, it was probably more likely, based on the way the Union troops responded later, that he probably only took about 30 with him, including Frank and Jesse. And their intentions, to me, seemed like they were just going in there for the purpose of robbing the northern Missouri train that they knew was coming into town at about that time. And as it happened, when they got to town, they timed it right, so there was also a stagecoach coming into town, which they certainly did not miss the opportunity to rob the stagecoach. They came into Centralia, and aboard the stagecoach was a congressman and a sheriff, and both of them were smart enough to give fake names and not identify themselves, or they probably would have been dead, but they ended up not getting killed in the robbery and just getting robbed for their troubles. There's not any exact stories as to whether Jesse and Frank participated directly in the stagecoach robbery itself, but my guess is probably yes, because later on after the stagecoach robbery, they proceeded to take railroad ties and various other things and basically just block the track, so that by the time the train came in, it would pretty much have to stop, and it couldn't. A lot of times the trains, if they would suspect they were going to be robbed, they would just basically put it up to full throttle and not stop. But since the tracks were barricaded, the train was pretty much forced to come to a stop. And there were 24 Union troops unarmed aboard the train that were coming home on leave at the time. So when they found out about that, they, besides robbing the passengers, they took all the Union soldiers and lined them up alongside the track. And then I think it was Bloody Bill Anderson that asked who were the officers. And there was one guy that was either, I don't know if you'd call him brave enough or maybe stupid enough to actually say that he was a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant, and that was Sergeant Thomas Goodman, who had stepped forward and identified himself, and probably thinking after he did that probably the next thing was going to be a bullet to his head. But what happened was they actually pushed him off to the side and then proceeded to go down the line and shoot all the rest of the soldiers. So all the rest of the soldiers were dead. And what they ended up doing was tying him up and putting him on a horse and taking him back to where they were camped about 4 miles south of town. And they told him later on, since he was brave enough and actually had the guts to say he was an officer, that's why they let him live. But also part of the other reason is it was typical for outlaws. What you would do is if you were going to do a raid, is you would always make sure, especially if you came across somebody important like a congressman or somebody that was a Union officer, is you would capture and at least leave 1 or 2 alive for a prisoner exchange if need be, because if the Union troops, if an armed force actually came upon you and you were able to escape and keep somebody hostage, you could always do a prisoner exchange and possibly get some of your men back, if not all of them, in exchange for the officers. So I think that was probably just as much of the reason why Sergeant Goodman ended up living. And after they got back to the place they were encamped, they ended up just letting him go. So he later on actually wrote a book with some Civil War stories in it. I've never actually read the book myself. I was just told that he did write a book. So if anybody's a Civil War historian, look up, maybe you could share some information to me about Sergeant Thomas Goodman. And so after Centralia was basically robbed and looted, Major A.V. Johnston was assigned the task of going after them. And the reason why I think there were probably only 30 people that went into Centralia originally instead of 100 is because when he, before he took off after Bloody Bill Anderson's gang to hunt him down and try to bring them to justice, he talked to some of the townspeople in Centralia, and they were trying to warn him. He had like about, I think he had about 165 guys with him, to go after them, and he seemed to be, the way the people were talking to him, he seemed to be very overconfident that his soldiers could take them on pretty easily, and that's why I'm thinking that only 30 people were there in Centralia, but the people kept telling him, and he wasn't listening, that there was a huge force camped out 4 miles south of town, and he didn't really seem to take much heed in their warning, and that ended up costing him dearly when he went after the Bloody Bill Anderson's guerrillas. So what I'm going to do is actually leave that story for the next part, and that will be part 5, when Major A.V. Johnston from the Missouri 39th Infantry goes after Bloody Bill Anderson and his guerrilla band of 225.